In question number 12, we're going to need to write the equation for the number line, remembering that the number line represents the x-axis. The shading represents where the graph would be above the x-axis, and the unshaded areas represent the areas where the graph is below the x-axis. So we're going to treat this much like we treat the rest of these graphs. We're going to start on the right side, and then we're going to look at each root at where the graph needs to be, above or below in that region. So we're going to first start in the region between the right side of the graph and the first root at 2. Since it's not shaded in that region, we're going to start below the graph. Now, if we start below the graph, that means we're going to head upwards and approach the root at 2. Once we get there, we're just going to stop, and then we're going to look at what comes next, which is the gap between 2 and 0. Since the graph has to be above the line, since it's shaded there, we know that we're going to make our graph go up like this. Now notice, it's really ugly and it doesn't even matter. We just need to know where the graph goes through. Now that we're at 0, we need to look at the next region. Since this is shaded, we know that in this region, our graph has to be above. Again, looks like crap, no one cares. Now that we're at -6, we're going to need to look at this last region. It's not shaded, so that means the graph must be down below in that area. Now this doesn't have to look like a pretty graph because all that matters is the equation. We know that the equation is going to have x plus 6 as one of its factors. We know that we're going to have 0 as another factor, which looks like x. And we know that x minus 2 is the last factor. Now, it's up to us to determine how these factors are going to look based on the fact that some of them go through where others bounce. If you're not sure how to tell the difference between through and bounce, I'll give you some examples. The first thing that we did was go through +2 to get from down below to up here. So +2, that factor, will have no exponents. Now, if you recall, we came at 0 from above, and then we hit 0 but stayed above. That's what we call a bounce. So that means the x, that's where the 0 came from, that one has the square. Now, coming from above, we headed through -6, so we ended up down below, which implies that x plus 6 doesn't have any exponents. The last consideration to make was to remember that when we started our original graph on the right side, we started down below. So that implies that this graph is negative. That's always the very first thing we include in our equation. Once we include the negative, we can use all 3 of those factors in any order that we want. It's customary to put the x squared first, since it doesn't have any parentheses, followed by, in this case, the x plus 6 and the x minus 2. You can always check to be sure. This has a degree of 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can tell just from checking our own work that we have the right equation, which matches the right graph.